Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you afterwards. We encourage you, before we get started, to share in the chat who you are and where you're from, where you're joining us from today. So today's webinar series, today's Forest Economy webinar series is focused on examining the opportunities and challenges in the forest economy sector. The Center is really excited about the innovation and local impact the forest economy sector has on northern forest communities. My name is Kelli Seeker. I am the marketing director at the center. I help lead the Feel Good Heat initiative with the most recent efforts revolving around a marketing campaign to educate consumers on the benefits of heating your home with modern wood heat. Since June, we've actually deployed animation and graphics on YouTube and Google Display Ads, and it's reached over 4.5 million people. So the recent fluctuating oil costs have caused more people to become interested in heating their home with alternative fuels. And with the upcoming, as we are entering the upcoming heating season, this felt like a natural next topic in our webinar series. Today, you'll hear from 4 different industry professionals, each focused on a different sector of the industry, from policy to pellet production and commercial and consumer trends. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we will revisit those towards the end of the webinar. I want to pass it over to Joe Short, the Center's Vice President, to really kick off the facilitation of our conversation.
Thank you, Kelli, and welcome everybody. It's great to see the audience start to appear on our participant list. We have a multi-state and looks like multinational audience with us today. So welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining. As Kelli said, I'm Joe Short. I work as the Vice President here at the Northern Forest Center, and I'm really honored to be able to host and facilitate our discussion today about wood heat. We have a fantastic set of panelists joining us today who've each prepared a presentation. We're going to start by hearing from them and then pivot to discussion amongst the panel and your questions. For questions, we ask that you please use the Q&A feature. It'll be a button down at the bottom of your screen next to the chat to register your questions and comments as we go. We prefer that over the chat, please, as a way to monitor your questions. And again, after we've heard from our panelists, we will turn to those. I did see one practical question already about whether this was pre-approved for any forestry credits. It is not, to answer Jonathan's question. So with us today, we have John Ackerly, who's the founder and president of the Alliance for Green Heat. They work nationally to advance cleaner and more efficient residential heating technology and have a particular emphasis on wood and pellet stoves. Hannah Campbell is joining us from Maine Energy Systems in Maine, as you might guess. She's their marketing and public relations specialist, and they manufacture and distribute automatic wood pellet boiler systems with a focus on residential and small commercial applications. We're also joined by Mark Froling, who's the president of Froling Energy. They focus on mid to large biomass heating systems and also produce and deliver fuel. And Kelli Ramsey, who is with Curran Renewable Energy in Messina, New York. Their marketing manager. They manufacture premium residential wood pellets. As you can tell from those names and affiliations, we've tried to bring together a set of folks who are working at different parts of the wood heat supply chain and sector to have a diverse set of perspectives on how the industry, how the sector is doing as we step into this next heating season, the things they're excited about, the things that they're challenged by, and the things that the industry and the public are focused on as they relate to wood heat. I will note as we start that context matters tremendously when talking about the use of wood for energy. And we are here today to learn and talk about the use of wood for heat in the Northeast. That's our context. And I note that because that context is very distinct from other regions and uses of wood for energy, like pellet export to Europe for electrical generation in the Southeast, or standalone wood electric generation. I'm guessing that many on this call today are familiar with the complexity and some of the controversy. And I just want to note that context of the Northeast and thermal uses of wood is what we're talking about today. So I encourage your questions and discussion specific to that context, and I'll be facilitating us in that direction. So with that, I would like to invite John to share the first slide that he has for us, and ask John Ackerly, again, with the Alliance for Green Heat. He's going to start with kind of his national perspective on the outlook for wood heat from where he sits. So John, welcome, thank you, and the screen is yours.
Great, thank you, Joe. I just want to first start out by thanking you for doing this, because presentations, webinars like this are really important in our sector. Unlike solar and wind, people don't know nearly enough about wood heating and the technology behind it. And there are not many groups like Northern Forest Center. So I really applaud the work you're doing, especially because you're not just supporting wood heat generally, you're supporting modern wood heat and moving your states and our whole country towards more modern automated wood heat, which is really what we need. So yeah, I'm the president of the Alliance for Green Heat. We're also a nonprofit. We're based in Maryland and 13 years old now. And we focus a lot on technology and policy. Okay, the outlook for wood heat. Now, as we all know, wood and pellet heat are surging this year. I think a lot of retailers are saying their sales are up 30, 50%, and it's even greater in Europe. And a lot of this is due to Ukraine, but not all of it. Our sector is unique because unlike solar and wind and electric cars, government incentives and policies are not a big driver. And that's partially because governments are confused and there's a lot of ambiguous policy, for some for good reasons, some not. But the way forward is not really clear for a lot of local, state, and federal governments. And in fact, here in the US, we have our agencies, and in part they complement each other, but in part they even work at cross purposes because there is a real lack of vision and cohesion about how to best use thermal biomass to help get our country off fossil fuels. So just want to give a quick overview of the agencies involved. So EPA is probably the agency most associated with wood heat because they certified the stoves. And that's a really important role. And I think we need to give them credit for making our stoves a hell of a lot cleaner than they were 30, 40 years ago. But they are an air quality agency, so they do not necessarily support, in fact, I don't think they really support at all, the growth of wood and pellet heating. They want to clean up the air, and they're doing a good job at that, which is important. But they, they're understaffed, they don't have the expertise, and they sometimes make poor decisions. Now, the USDA Forest Service, they are extremely supportive, more focused on sustainable supply of feedstock, and more focused on the commercial scale. A much newer player in the scene is a DOE, and they now have some money to do R&D for next generation stoves and boilers. So this is really the modern wood heat that Northern Forest Center is supporting. They're now the primary funder of our Wood Heat Design Challenge. And it's extremely important positive role, but it's very underfunded, which leads me into Congress. If it weren't for Congress, we would not have the stature that we do. It's only because of Congress, and I really want to, call out the delegations from Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, who are so important to keep some focus on wood heat in Congress. And as a result, there are some incentives and some positive policies. This year, everyone can get a 26% tax credit with no upper limit, as long as the appliance is 75% efficient. But this $2,000 cap, which is the result of Senator Manchin not wanting unlimited tax credits for heat pumps. We got thrown into that. So it does create some winners and losers in our sector. And I'll let Hannah and others talk about that in a few minutes. But the big issue here is we are still, our incentives are still tax credits. What's happening with heat pumps and a lot of other stuff is it's moving next year to a rebate or a point of sale system. And this benefits low and middle income families a lot more. And if we want to move our technology forward, we also need to transition away from tax credits to a point of sale discount, where the consumer gets it right away and you don't have to have enough taxes and wait till next April to benefit. Whoops. Okay, so, some people thought wood heat would disappear. And in fact, if you look at the charts, it does look like it's almost disappearing from where it started in 1940. The yellow line here shows it going down. And in fact, it went to 1% of the country heated with wood heat in the 1970s. Now we're back up to 2%, which is, double, but still it's only 2%. Of course, in many states, like up in New England, it's, 5 to 12%. But the question is, what is really sustainable? And as you can see from the photo in the bottom, New Hampshire is a great example of a state that had absolutely unsustainable harvesting. And while only a little of that was wood heating, part of it was wood heating, but in general, these days, forests have come back. We think that most states, you could have 50% more wood heat in each state, maybe an average or even 100%, maybe an average of 5% nationally. Now, we think that's entirely sustainable for our wood supply, but not necessarily from the amount of pollution. If we have a rapid increase of traditional cordwood heating, we could get a lot, really too much pollution in towns and valleys, and this could lead to a backlash. So we really need to, think about that, be responsible. I think towns and counties actually have to do more enforcement because often it's, it's like a few people are the real bad actors. Most people may be burning their stoves pretty well, but some aren't. But that, I predict we're going to see some backlash at the end of this winter because of the increased wood heating. So the push to electrify everything. Can you guys see these things on my screen?
Yes, we can.
Oh, it's annoying, isn't it? I don't
Like that.
Okay, there we go. So, the big, as everyone knows, the push to electrify everything, one of the biggest targets, of course, is residential heating. And I have been encouraging our industry to see this, oh my God, as a, not as competition, but as a complementary, something, more complementary, because my organization supports all renewable heating. Of course, we focus on wood heat, but cold climate heat pumps, they're here to stay. And I think we need to let policymakers know that we are an incredibly important complement or supplement to them, because we will see more winter peaks in electricity. Our grid is already getting stressed from this changeover to renewables. Wood provides, it's a great backup. It provides heat in the evening when we need it most, and at night. And that's when we don't have so much solar. And after all, wood is it's a battery. It's nature's battery. And it's incredibly efficient, far more efficient than Tesla Powerwalls. A cord of wood, I think, has as much energy as about 5 Tesla Powerwalls, or 10, I forget, that someone's done the calculation. So we need to educate people about this opportunity, and partially we need to do it to save renewable electricity for things that can't be powered by other forms of renewables. Okay, just a little bit on technology. So, probably in the United States, about 2/3 of sales are wood stoves, 1/3 pellets. We like to see, we're hoping that the number of pellet stoves will start increasing. We think our communities can absorb a lot more pellet stoves in a very sustainable way. But non-cat stoves are dominant, and these are all manually operated. And these are the stoves that are damped down at night and are very prone to consumer misuse. They're also effective. I mean, they're affordable, and they put out great heat, but there are some downsides. Now, the IRS tax credit has a 75% efficiency requirement, and this is moving the market. So it's a good thing to see more manufacturers are trying to hit that 75% mark to make sure they're eligible. And this has given rise to hybrid stoves. Hybrid stoves use both the catalyst and non-cat reburning technology. So non-cats have this, you see here, where the air comes in the top of the stove. That reburns a lot of smoke, and then the smoke keeps going, and then it hits a catalyst, reburns even more of it. So you get much cleaner, much more efficient burns. So we urge folks to, if you're interested in the cat stove, just buy a hybrid, because you'll get the best of both. Pellet stove technology hasn't changed too much. We urge everyone to check the EPA stove database, because some manufacturers define 75% in some very creative ways when their stoves actually are not 75% efficient. Now, the future, we hope, is in automated wood stoves. The automated wood stoves are just like, the larger boilers. They have air sensors, and it enables people to load your wood and walk away. And the sensors will take care of giving the stove the air that it needs. It does add some money to stoves. They don't necessarily even perform that much better in the lab, but they perform great in the hands of homeowners. And basically, it prevents people from smoldering their stoves. The problem is a lot of consumers don't necessarily want this yet or know about it. So there are definitely some barriers. And it may take some real incentives to get these on the market and to be deployed. I'll just make a quick note. The wood stove testing has become very politicized. Wood stoves were always tested with 2x4s for the past 30, 40 years. That's how stoves get tested for certification. We're trying to move to cordwood testing. The stoves on the left here, cordwood, but it's been a very rocky path. NESCOM fought and had the only the test method that did use cordwood revoked rather than altered. EPA is working on it, and hopefully in like 3 to 5 years, we will have some a good test method that all stoves can be tested by. Okay, that's it. And I do want to give a plug again for that the Feel Good Heat website. There's a great video. It's entertaining and informative, and I urge you all to check it out at feelgoodheat.org. And these are some of the other partners and institutions that are doing great work on wood heat. So thanks very much.
Thank you, John, for getting us going, and yeah, for helping to kind of define in some ways what we mean when we talk about modern wood heat. I think you say we all have a conception of wood heat and what it might look like, but I think as you describe, at least when we at the Northern Forest Center think and talk about modern wood heat, we're thinking about modern technology, but also modern in terms of the context in which we're working, right? So thinking about modern understanding of forest health and sustainability, of air quality, and of course of climate change. So next up, we asked 3 businesses who work in the wood heat realm, as I said at the top, all making and selling different products and services within that, to tell us a bit about their businesses and their products, and also what they're seeing in the marketplace currently. So we're going to start out with Hannah Campbell. Hannah, if you want to share your first slide. Again, Hannah is with Maine Energy Systems as their marketing and public relations specialists. And Hannah, the screen is yours.
All right, well, hello everyone. And as Joe introduced, I do work for Maine Energy Systems, and our product is a whole home wood pellet boiler or furnace. So quite a bit different than a lot of the stove conversation that John just walked us through. Similar, always with testing and politics, as I think a lot of renewable resources have seen. But we'll dive in a little bit more into that as we go through just a few slides here. All right, a little bit about this company. We are headquartered in Maine, and we focus on the largely residential or small business side of the market, so less of your larger applications, and solely wood pellets. In addition to manufacturing and selling boilers and furnaces, we also have a pellet delivery arm of the business. And that is bulk wood pellet delivery, so not bagged. It's actually a different market in terms of pricing, and how we get our pellets is direct from the mill. It's a little bit simpler, and it's certainly simpler for the homeowner as well. Couple facts on wood pellet basics here. Wood pellets largely come from forest byproducts. So we're not talking about going out and cutting down whole trees and turning them into wood pellets. Forest management is a really key part to everything that we do in all of the industries that we're talking about here, from forestry right down to the homeowner. And all of the pellets that we source, we make sure are sustainably harvested. I think that usually goes without saying, but it's nice to throw it out there too. So here you have a little diagram of what a central heating system looks like in a home. You can see that it sort of plumbs right into the existing infrastructure. Hot water can be run off of it. The storage system is bigger than an oil tank. Probably takes up about the footprint of 2 oil tanks, but they are unique based on how much storage space people have. Other than that, for the user, it is essentially like kind of like a heart transplant, where you take out an old system and you put a renewable one in, and then you cut your carbon heating footprint in half, and you save money on fuel, especially last winter and this winter. And as I mentioned, this is one of our pellet trucks. It looks like a fuel delivery truck. So focusing on the Northeast, as you know, Joe set our parameters here. Our forest is unique, it's vast, and we ironically burn a huge amount of heating oil. We rely really dominantly on #2 heating oil in New England. And yet we have a huge wood basket right in our backyard. And it seems counterintuitive. Why can't we sort of encourage people to decarbonize? Because the currency right now really is carbon when we talk about renewables. And electrification is good in some forms, but it's good when that electricity is coming from a renewable source as well. And we don't always have that here in New England. I think it's something like 70% of our electricity is non-renewably sourced at its base. That's an approximate number. So what we would like to see is more people adopt wood heating systems to help decarbonize our New England states. And it also supports our forestry resources. I know, at least in our area of the Northern Forest, we've seen paper mills close. We've seen logging diminish, and that type of industry and the industries that feed along with that have hugely supported this area over the past, well, I can speak for the last 30 years personally, but probably the last 50 to 100 or more years, and that industry has taken a hit. So every dollar that's spent on, local renewable wood pellet heat to heat a home, yes, it's decarbonizing. Yes, it's pretty stably priced compared to the volatility of fossil fuels, but additionally, that dollar goes back into our community here in our region. I think that's just really important to note. Talking about carbon, without getting too nerdy, photosynthesis is a great process. So trees, whether they fall down or whether they are burned or they're burned in a forest fire or they're turned into a wood pellet, they release the same amount of carbon that they intake. So it's an endless cycle. We're not introducing new carbon into the system, the natural system here, like you are when you dig up, say, fossil fuels. So this chart essentially shows that. You can see wood pellets are really low in terms of CO2 emissions, and that's per million BTUs, British thermal units. This chart is a little bit all over the place, and I realize the bottom line is going to be likely unreadable. Those are dates at the bottom. This is the cost of heating the average sized home in New England from 1995 to 2000 and June of 22. And as you can see, wood pellets are in the green, fairly stable line. I don't know if you can potentially see my cursor there. Okay.
Yep.
And then you have heating oil in the black and propane in the orange, and those tend to follow similar trends, which I think we're all pretty acutely aware of. Wood pellet fuel, however, has been pretty stable. It doesn't seem to follow the same cycle as fossil fuels. And a lot of that is just blankly, it is not tied to the same markets. It is different and it is locally sourced. It isn't as subject to a war in Ukraine, although everything is in some way, shape, or form. It isn't as drastically impacted as you can see here to date. It has gone up a little over time. There have been times where the green line is above the black, sure. But overall, I think it's a pretty stably priced option. A little bit on incentives, and John kindly kicked the tax credit conversation over my way about the $2,000 cap. So currently there are rebates in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. I believe Massachusetts is on hold right now, and same in New York. These things do kind of tend to ebb and flow. So we try to put a lot of energy into encouraging, groups like the Northern Forest Center or other industry partners to help us speak with our representatives in Congress and say, hey, this is really important. When you're looking at the cost of a pellet stove, it's a lot different than when you're looking at the cost of heating a whole home with a boiler or a furnace. And the technology is drastically different as well. So looking at that federal tax credit, it just went from 26%, it's going up to 30% at the start of 2023. But with a $2,000 cap on about a $20,000 install, that's not much of an incentive. So I think it's worth mentioning, some of us are speaking amongst each other in the industry and with some of our lawmakers, trying to explain that, yes, while that $2,000 cap is really helpful for a smaller installation, it is not necessarily as impactful for us. It is unfortunate that it got caught in the same sort of tax technicality paragraph as air source heat pumps, which is a great technology too in some applications. But we would like to see that cap raised to $8,000, which would not greatly impact the overall cost of the program in Congress's purview. So definitely more to come on that. And these are things that we spend a lot of time and energy working on, trying to push forward, I think, for the betterment of the homeowner and for the industry. And in terms of carbon, this is a way for New England to decarbonize, so it's very important. Right. And on TREX, you'll see that acronym here if you're not familiar. Those are thermal renewable energy credits. And what that means is for each ton of pellets that you use in your home or business, you can earn back a credit for that in the form of a check by using renewable fuel. We're rolling out a program in Maine. It's just at the beginning now, so it's baby steps forward. And we're looking to see that grow because it's a very simple program. It says, okay, you use this many tons, that's worth this many recs. And that's what we've been working with the Maine PUC on. And we're looking to hopefully be able to replicate that same program into New Hampshire and potentially even Vermont. And I know Vermont's very forward with their incentives. They're kind of ahead of the game in a lot of ways. Okay. So that is my last slide. And the only other thing I just wanted to mention, Joe, I know I'm probably out of time.
No, you're doing great.
Okay, great. In terms of the efficiency and how we measure, the test results and all of the systems that I'm talking about here, upwards of 80% efficient, and not getting into too much of the technical part of it, but they do kind of reburn the gases, as John alluded to, some pellet stoves do. There's a regasification process which even increases the efficiency more. So what ends up happening is you're letting fewer particulates out into the air at the end of the day. What that means is the boiler, yes, so you can burn cordwood and you'll see smoke. And that smoke is comprised of carbon, it's comprised of steam because cordwood is up to 40% water. And I love a good fireplace, don't get me wrong. But when you take that and you dry it into a chip, your moisture content is less. And then you take that and you put it into a pellet, it's even less. So the energy that you're getting from that waste wood is so highly condensed that it's just extremely more efficient for heat purposes. And I think that is a huge part of the conversation as well. So.
Great, thank you so much, Hannah. Great overview of I think a pretty interesting and not always super well-known technology, a whole home heating option. So next we're going to turn and go up a scale with Mark Froling with Froling Energy. And his company deals more with mid to large biomass heating systems. So these would be appropriate for schools and hospitals and larger institutions. So we're trying to kind of cover the waterfront, so to speak, of the different applications of wood for heat. Thank you all who've started to populate our Q&A with questions or comments. Please keep those coming. And again, we ask that we're checking the chat as well, but the Q&A is the primary place to dump those. Please jot them down as they come to you. And we're hoping to reserve the second half of our time here for discussion and to get to all of your questions. So keep them coming. But for now, Mark, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Joe. Again, my name is Mark Froling, and I own and operate Froling Energy, and we're in the southwest of New Hampshire in a small town called Keene. It's close to Brattleboro, it's close to Massachusetts, and we're as far away from the coast as possible, really. And we have been in the biomass field for some 14 years now, and on the boiler side, energy side of the biomass. Before then, I was actually involved on the pellet production side, and then was enticed to get into the consumer side of the pellets. And that's when I got interested in pellet boilers. Soon that led to wood chip boilers, and then led into making a wood chip fuel. And so the history, and you can go ahead and forward to the next slide, please. So we have been at a mechanical contractor, really, installing biomass heating systems since 2008, and installed about 350 boilers now in the Northeast in 3 different states. It's in about 100-mile circle around our facility in Keene, and so we go fairly far south. And we have our furthest northern one is in the middle of Maine, and in the middle of Massachusetts towards the south, and all the way western Vermont, and all the way eastern New Hampshire. So it's a good circle around our facility. And when we started, we actually started with pellet boilers, and In 2008, they were very favorable all the way up until 2012, when the prices changed a little bit and we were having a hard time selling boilers at that point. And we looked for a cheaper fuel. And so we went out to Europe to see what they do for cheaper fuels. And we discovered sort of a medium fuel that was really interesting for us and could also be burned in some of the commercial boilers as well that we had already installed for pellets. And so we found this dry chip fuel, and we started to imitate essentially what they were doing in Europe and drying the green chips, taking the moisture out and making it into a really refined dry chip fuel that was the same, had a precise size, precise moisture content, and the best of all, a very precise energy content. And we still, until this day, install quite a few pellet boilers as well. We install the Froling pellet boilers and the Okerfin pellet boilers, and they're terrific. So we're not necessarily a specialist in these dry chips, but it is a fuel that we make here on site in Keene. And of course, we sell quite a few of those boilers that consume them as well. But we are agnostic in terms of wood energy. We even install cordwood boilers as well. But primarily, 90% of our revenue really comes from the dry chip market, just because the scale gets much larger, and so the consumption is much larger. The boilers are much larger, and the projects are much larger. And so, you know, for every, we might install to this day still more pellet boilers every year, but the consumption is really 90% of the consumption is really on the chip side. And the big advantage for the dry chips is really, I mean, it's the same wood. There's really one step less to make a dry chip, because we're not making it into a densified fuel, and we're not drying it quite as much down. A pellet is typically dried to 12% on the feedstock, and then compressed down. During the compression cycle or the press cycle of the pellet, it loses a little bit more moisture as well because of the heating effect and during the compression. And so then you end up with 7% on a pellet, or maybe sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. And so this dry chips is a little bit of a medium fuel, has one less step, no compression or no densification, but it is still very refined and precise. And one of the advantages of this dry chip fuel over, for instance, green chips, is that we can use a pneumatic blower truck. Also, the dry chips, because of this moisture content, don't freeze in bins. And so when, you know, it used to be just 10 years ago that a lot of schools were buying green chip boilers, and that has become a little bit less favorable since we've introduced this dry chip boiler, just because there are some distinct advantages of this dry chip. For instance, there's no molding, no mold growth in schools. When you have a bin and you have some moisture and some biogenic material, you oftentimes have mold growth, and that is avoided with these dry chips. You can store them up to a year in a bin without any kind of decomposition. So the energy content doesn't leave your room before you fire up your boiler and whatnot. And because they are a manufactured chip, it is quite a precise energy content. So as you're going through the seasons, the energy from different seasons, the moisture content doesn't vary, and because of that, the energy content is stable. And as you're going through the seasons, your boiler doesn't need to be adjusted to essentially regulate the additional moisture content you might see in green chips in the spring. As the moisture is going back into the trees, the green chips become naturally more water latent, and thus the boilers have to be a little bit adjusted here and there, or they just run a lot less efficient. And so this fuel has a sort of a distinct advantage, such as same as pellets, and the pellets are even more refined and a more precise fuel just yet. And the big advantage for pellets is really that they flow very nicely and they can move with gravity. And so this fuel does not have that advantage, but it's a medium and it's quite cheap compared to pellets. It's, you know, dry chips are yet another 30% cheaper than the pellets. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Go ahead, next one down. So this is a typical boiler from Froling that can use the dry chips, and it can also use pellets. And we have it installed, many of them all throughout the 3 states that we mostly service. It does quite well as a package boiler. This is not sort of a custom-made boiler. This is a package that's readily available within, there is some shipping lag right now that is, it's a little bit longer than usual, but in general, this boiler is readily available and can use both wood pellets and wood chips. And the reason why this is actually quite important, because we install a lot of boilers in commercial entities such as schools, courthouses, jails sometimes, hospitals, nursing homes, town halls, police stations, mostly public work that we undertake. And there's always a need for redundancy. And there is a lot of questions about the viability, for instance, of my company, even though there's other competitors that are making dry fuels. But there is still a little bit of distrust that we might not make it through a season, or we underperform on the deliveries. And so the ability for this boiler to utilize pellets and chips provides a little bit of a redundancy for the clients as well. And that is very favorable when you can have a boiler like that, because it is actually quite difficult to burn dried materials. You have to have a specialized pellet boiler or specialized chip boiler to be able to burn dry materials. It's the green chip boilers in many ways are a little bit simpler technology because of the moisture content of the green chips. It is actually easier to control sort of the temperatures inside the boiler because of the additional water content that is constantly steamed, vaporized during the process. But when you have very dry pellets and dry chips, you have to really be able to control the combustion temperatures so you don't have a runaway effect and get into the clinkers that can easily be created when you overheat. And so these kind of package units, as well as all the pellet boilers that Hannah was talking about, actually have very good measurement of their combustion chamber and good control of their primary and secondary air, and thus can control the temperatures and not have really any clinkers. We've had these pellet boilers from Maine Energy Systems now for, I think since 2008, we have been installing them. And really, even the oldest of boilers still to this day, then they have to be maintained for sure, but they really don't generate clinkers. And the combustion control is just tremendous. And we're finding them the same with the Froling. And of course, we also have Wiesmann equipment as well. And so every manufacturer really has been concentrating on sort of a certain market size and a certain specialty. Froling is sort of, they are good on the residential side and the light commercial. That's really their primary target. They do well, and same with Okafen. They do a great job on the light commercial and residential. Thank you so much. And then Wiesmann here is a little bit larger in scale yet, and they don't really focus on the small boilers, especially in the US market. Not they have it in the European market. And so for them, a small boiler really starts at like 1 million BTU, and then they go right up to about 4.5 million BTU. And those type of boilers now can be used in high schools, middle schools, anywhere you see maybe a use of 30 or 40 or 50,000 gallons of fuel oil use right now. And then we put in a boiler like this and can offset that type of fuel oil use that we're seeing. Go ahead and do the next one. Here's another boiler plant here for the University System of New Hampshire. That's, I believe, in Plymouth, New Hampshire, and where we have 2 boilers on the 2nd floor. And this is our PDC production facility. It's actually our first facility. We're now in a new facility, but I don't have the updated photos yet. And then we can see our dryer on the right-hand side and our boiler plant on the in the center there with a stack over the top. And in this facility, we're able to make about 100 ton a day of PDCs in our own production in Keene, and it's really right off Main Street in Keene. And then we store about 2,000 ton on site in this small town. And then we have about 5 trucks going out on every single day. Go ahead, next slide, please. And the locally made, Hannah has already mentioned that the locally made aspect is actually one of the most important selling points for customers. Many times we have customers that are really leaning towards wanting to utilize a fuel that's made in New Hampshire. So obviously wood chips and even wood pellets are made in New Hampshire, of course, also in Maine as well. And that is very attractive for schools and for universities and public entities that want to engage with local companies rather than with international firms that are importing from far away. And so it is very likely that when we're delivering to a school in Vermont, you can see the back of the blower truck here, and it is actually filling these pipes. We have 4 bins in this particular facility, and it's very likely that we have in every school that 1 or 2 of the kids will have either a family member that's a logger that has a relationship to this production, to the fuel that's being sold in the school, frankly. And here's just a slide showing the PDCs. They're a little bit smaller than they actually are in this particular picture, and then the pellets here. And that's one of our big advantages. Now, it comes with a disadvantage. The pellets are more refined, and of course we sell them, sell the pellet boilers as well. But the disadvantage of the PDCs is that you need a little bit more capital to, because the boilers are larger and more, just more robust for that kind of chip. And so you need larger material handling systems, larger bins, more capital expenses that go into a project on a PDC boiler. And sorry about that. And here's just a slide from a typical installation where you see the bin and there's a cross section, and then it would go in. A pellet boiler would be quite a bit easier compared to that, but the advantage of having the 30% cheaper fuel that's net after everything is done and compared, evenly. And so these systems take a little bit more to maintain. Because the pellets are so refined and they flow so easily, the augers just work a little bit better, and there's a little bit just more to do on a chip boiler. But the cost advantages on larger scales are realistic, and we have many installations that have really favorable paybacks. And here, this last slide here, actually, I know it's a little bit boring for people that don't really like numbers, but in the last 10 years or so, the oil market really has been up and down quite a bit. It's gone from the low price here, what is that, right around $2 anyways. And my prices, and forgive me, I don't really deal so much with residential customers. I have commercial customers, and we're really 90% of our company just deals with schools. And so this is the prices that our school customers typically pay in these years. And we get them when we do our payback analysis, we get the prices from them and create our paybacks based on that. And then you can see here, we've only been doing the dry chips for a few years now. Yeah, thank you for circling that. And so we started off quite cheap with $105, but then quickly realized that we needed to raise our prices, just like the pellet people as well. The pellets were, I didn't put that chart in here because I really wanted to kind of really focus on the chips here. But the pellets, when I first started, the pellets were right around $200 bulk delivered, and I think they're more on average closer to about $320 to $350 now in bulk deliveries. And so everything had to go up. Also on the oil side right now, for instance, we're seeing an enormous inflation in the last 3 years just because of the oil increases. Specifically this year, there's a lot of additional costs that we're seeing that are coming into the last 3 years just from the pandemic early on. That was more of a supply and demand issue. And now we're having an enormous inflation on our capital side. And that really has a little bit more to do with the recent energy prices and also the commodity prices of the steel that costs a lot more. And last year we got killed on shipping. So then all of a sudden we had enormous increases, almost 100% increases on shipping costs. And so it's kind of come a little bit from all sides, and it's a moving target. So we're hoping that within a couple of years, we're kind of back down to the norm and not have sort of the inflationary numbers that we're seeing at this time. So right now it's a little bit unbalanced. We're having to charge a little bit of a premium at this moment just to make the same numbers work for us.
Great, Mark. Thank you very much for that overview. And I know we're going to turn to Kelli next, but I'm seeing a number of questions in the Q&A around sourcing and sort of, where wood and fuel comes from. So we'll come back to those and chat with Mark some about that. But first, want to get to our final panelist, Kelli Ramsey with Curran Renewable Energy. They're a manufacturer of premium residential wood pellets. So Kelli, screen is yours to share your thoughts, and we do see the questions in the Q&A, and as soon as Kelli's wrapped up, we will begin to turn to those. But Kelli, take it away.
All righty, let's see here. I'm just trying to get it in full screen mode. Okay. Hi there. Like Joe said, my name is Kelli Ramsey. I'm the marketing manager of Curran Renewable Energy. We're a premium wood pellet manufacturer that does residential fuel based in Messina, New York, which is right up on the US-Canadian border. It's difficult to do this presentation without also addressing our sister company, Seaway Timber Harvesting, since we are intrinsically linked together. We've been making wood pellets since 2019, so for about 14 years, but I've been in the logging business with Seaway Timber for close to 50 years. Seaway Timber directly supplies the wood fiber, vertically integrating our operations. Both companies are family run and operated by my father, Pat, and his brothers, Tim and Lee. In the top right-hand side, you're going to see that's an image of our wood pellet manufacturing facility. And then down at the bottom are just some pictures of my dad, brothers, and where they kind of got started with chainsaws way back in the day. And then the bottom right-hand side are the three primary owners of the businesses. What got us started in wood pellets is the paper mills were really starting to diminish. So we knew we needed to diversify our markets to be able to keep our families employed in our region. Stewardship of the land and making quality wood products is what drives our companies today. Working forests are carefully managed to ensure us to serve multiple wood product markets in a way that naturally regenerates forest supply. About 20% of what we harvest does go to sawmills. Tree bark is made into mulch. Seaway Timber does bag wood mulch. And excess forest residuals go to Re-Energy Fort Drum, which is a military base that they use to produce electricity. The lowest grade trees go to wood pellet production or paper mills. New York is densely populated with low-grade fiber. Through proper forest management, the health of today's forest continues to flourish in New York. All right, so here is just a quick overview of our products. So on the top, those are our wood fuel products. We make a premium and hardwood blend pellet. That's our primary selling product. We also make a premium hardwood and a premium softwood pellet. That's kind of more special order to do the softwood. And then the hardwood softwood blend on the far right, that is a private label that goes to Lowe's. We also bag for some other private label companies as well. So you could purchase these at mom and pop stove stores, hardware stores, big box stores. And then in the top right, you're going to see an image of us delivering with our bulk pneumatic truck. Similar to what Hannah and Mark were talking about. That is at the New York State DEC facility in Raybrook. It's very similar to ag feed. It's pneumatically blown right in. Some municipalities will use a silo like you see here. We've seen homeowners use silos. Some have like retrofitted bins that are very aesthetically pleasing and match the siding to their homes. Or people have bags similar to what Hannah had shown. That's what my father has in his basement, is a Maine Energy Systems bag, similar to the graphic that she showed you. We also make barbecue wood pellets. Down below is just a few images of the different species that we make for that. I'm just going to go over our certifications and kind of why that's so important in this business. So the Pellet Fuels Institute, or the PFI, they certify our wood pellets as premium grade for residential fuel. PFI does perform random monthly audits and sends samples to an accredited lab that screens for the PFI premium quality parameters. We do also do in-house testing by the hour. Something that they test and audit for is, your ash content, BTU, moisture content, length, durability, fines. All of these things, we have to meet a specific parameter to make sure that what we are producing is quality product to be burned in the stoves and boilers. Also, another very important certification, which is key to our sustainability practices, is logging, our logging practices and our certification through FSC. So both our logging and wood pellet manufacturing businesses are Forest Stewardship Council certified, which signifies our dedication to ethical forestry and manufacturing. FSC is an independent, non-governmental, not-for-profit organization that's recognized internationally that helps promote the responsible management of the world's forests. You'll see this logo on a lot of different wood products, not just with wood pellets these days. So this is just a quick overview of the state of the market. I'm sure you've all seen, experienced increase of fuel prices at the pump. Just this past year, actually just this past month, we've seen diesel prices go back up $1. So it's never ending. That has definitely increased the demand here in the US. And I'm sure many of you are watching the news, and the war that's going on in Ukraine has really created a massive influx, almost desperation by European countries looking for wood pellets. I think that there is some major fuel insecurity in Europe due to the sanctions in Russia and Belarus. They provided a pretty good portion of wood fuel pellets to these European nations. So without that ability to pull from Russia and Belarus, they're now calling, I would say most pellet manufacturers I've talked to are getting phone calls, if not daily, looking for supply. And just this past week, I don't know if you'd seen that Russia's been attacking their infrastructure and energy grids. So it's almost as if they're trying to freeze the Ukrainians out. So, and a lot of these other places are going to suffer as well. So we are servicing both markets. We do produce wood pellets here for the domestic market, and this year we are also exporting. If we can, do what we can to help in some small way, help our European allies so they're not left out in the cold, we're going to do so. I don't see this demand for the export market changing for another couple of years. I don't think sanctions will be lifted right away. These are some of the headwinds that we're facing. Like I mentioned earlier, the rising fuel costs. Our pellet sales are increasing, but we still have to harvest the timber, and we still have to transport the material. So that affects everything. It affects increased costs across the board. Inflation is huge. So again, the cost of supplies to produce is increased. Employees demand higher wages so they can also deal with their increased costs at home. So we're doing everything we can to try to support our employees in this unprecedented time. And then also New York has quite a bit of an invasive species tree disease issue. So, we've harvested in some places that have seen 20% mortality in some stands. So we're trying to always, head that off and, be able to harvest this timber before it's dead, because it's really useless on the forest floor, and we can use it as a value-added product in this state. And then another major part of pretty much everything going on in the US, not just with pellets, is a massive driver shortage that's going to make prices go up just all across the board, harder to transport materials and goods. So that we've definitely seen. And just why wood pellets? Well, wood heat, I'm a little bit biased here, but I think it's amazing. There's nothing really like it. It's a much different, better form of heat. I have electric in my house, just for an example, and I use wood pellets as a secondary source of heat. I have a wood pellet stove. I'm a busy mom with 2 toddlers, and I'm not joking at all when I say that this morning I was running late, and instead of blow drying my hair, I stopped when I walked past the pellet stove, and I was like, here we go. This is the soup. I blow dried my hair this morning with my pellet stove, and it was much faster and more efficient. So I think I've just created a new marketing for wood pellets for women to dry their hair in the morning when they're in a hurry. But more seriously, the money stays local when you are producing and purchasing wood fuel that's made right here in the Northeast. Otherwise, with fuel oil, it's leaving our region. The majority of that money is going somewhere else. It does not stay local. So I think it's very important that we consider the reasons why wood heat is so important. It is more cost stable. Yes, our costs have gone up, so our prices have gone up in some capacity, but nothing like in comparison to what fuel oil is. And it is just across the board more cost stable. It creates jobs. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. It creates and retains jobs. We have close to 100 employees between our logging business and also our biomass production side. So it's really important that we keep the whole market moving, whether it's logging, your trucking, your parts and manufacturing, your servicing. There's a lot of industry in New York State that depends on wood products. And it reduces our dependency on fossil fuels and foreign entities with oil, like I mentioned before. And renewable heat that comes from sustainably managed forests. It's something that you can be proud of and be, happy knowing that you're contributing to keeping your energy use local and helping to battle climate change. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know. And thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Kelly. That was excellent. So to our audience, I hope you found that those 4 presentations informative and taught you some things. And we know you're out there because to our panelists, we've got a great set of questions to keep us going for the next half hour. So before we get to some of the audience questions, I'd love to hear, John, you said at the top, you were hearing from your constituencies about sales increases of 30-50%. For Hannah, Mark, and Kelly, I'm curious if you could just quickly characterize what you've seen in the last year as traditional fossil fuel prices have gone up. Can you just give us a quick sense of how's business been in the last 12 months? Hannah, can we start with you?
Sure. It's a pretty easy answer, actually. We're seeing record sales, and I don't think that's a big shock. People are seeking for us. I mean, we do market. This year, it seems like just the organic search for what can I do to not burn oil has driven a lot of people to us. So yeah, we are right straight out, but it's a really good problem to have. And we're just prepared to keep growing.
Mark, how about for you and your business?
Yeah, it's coming along pretty good because we work in the commercial and institutional field. Our sales cycle is very long. I mean, it might surprise people, but we oftentimes have a 2-year sales cycle on a commercial project. And so we're just now, I mean, obviously we have a ton of inquiry, but that doesn't actually lead to sales because it has to be publicly voted in. Almost, all of our projects are sort of publicly funded. And so the school boards in March, we're up for maybe 7 or 8 school conversions this spring coming up. But if they don't get voted in because of politics or discontent, then we don't get these projects. So it's a little bit different on the commercial side and publicly funded projects. We are seeing increases on the light commercial that's privately owned, and also on the residential, we're seeing quite a bit of increase there for sure. And yeah, the appetite is very large, but because of the sales cycle, this is just less, not less sales, but it just hasn't happened yet because it's a delayed effect. Yeah.
And Kelly, how about for your mill?
Yeah, it's definitely been a busy year. We've definitely seen people nervous as far as like, with the fuel oil prices. So the increased demand here domestically has increased. And like I'd mentioned over in Europe with the fuel insecurity issue that's going on. I mean, it's a really unfortunate situation, what's happening overseas, and we'd rather be chasing market than having the situation that's happening to everybody over there. But we're certainly going to be able to contribute to both our domestic market and overseas if we can, to help keep people warm this heating season. But again, every year is kind of dependent on what Mother Nature brings. We can only plan for so much. If we have a mild winter, then it's a mild year. So we'll see.
So there was a question from Nancy in Vermont, just wondering about how fuel supplies are looking for this winter. I know I've seen some headlines here in New Hampshire forecasting pellet shortages. I think we've also observed, for those of you who sell equipment, a couple of you alluded to this. There's supply chain constraints, as well as there's only a certain number of installers for the more complicated systems. So could each of you just comment quickly on the question of from the lens that you have, the ability to kind of keep up with demand, whether that's in fuel availability or equipment availability, in light of this pretty strong demand for the products?
I'll go first if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like as a wood pellet producer, there's repairs that have to be made on the mill pretty consistently. So having spare parts is important. That's really challenging with the market and the way it's been the last few years. I mean, you could be like months out getting a replacement part, and the costs are exorbitant. They're just crazy what they used to be. At times there've been wood pallet shortages, or the super increased prices of wood pallets, which is what you put wood pellets on just to store it like a retail level. But also if you have trucking shortages, that makes it more difficult to get material to your place to produce. And then it makes it more challenging to then have the availability or available drivers to then bring product to retail levels and to individuals as well. So the trucking is huge all over the place. That affects so many industries. But as far as like wood fiber supply, that we don't have an issue with in New York State. So the supply is there. There's so many, there's such an abundance of low grade fiber where we are.
Thanks, Kelly.
And as far as people being like afraid of there being a shortage, every wood pellet producer can produce X amount of tonnage per year, but it can't all be produced at one time. It takes a full 12 months to make, let's say your capacity is 100,000. It's going to take you all 12 months to make that. So it matters about timing of when the demand is up. If everybody's looking for pellets at the exact same time, then it is harder to get the amount of volume that maybe everybody needs. But if the purchasing cycle is year round, 12 months versus 6 months on the back end, then it's easier. Because a lot of the retail stores, like on the back side, they don't necessarily want to carry product on their floors in spring and summer. And it's difficult for pellet producers to have the capital to produce that in the off season, and it just sit there. So we can build inventory, but not everybody can build an entire, year's worth ahead of time. You have to make it as you go.
I know one of the selling points for bulk pellet systems is that I think that provides a little bit more predictability, right? In terms of the deliverer knows, okay, that installation is going to need X tons of pellets per year. And similarly, the customer can have some confidence. So Hannah, do you want to speak to that in terms of how Maine Energy Systems is seeing ability to keep up with customer demand, both for systems and fuel?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year. I mean, we're not immune to the supply chain cycles or anything like that. We've been pretty lucky, and I say lucky because we've put a lot of work into to work out wrinkles in our supply chain in terms of getting parts for boilers and stuff like that to us. So that's not really where we're feeling the pressure right now. I think our biggest pressure points are, we have this huge surge in demand. We have, installers across the region, but we need more, they can only install so many in a week or in a month.
Mhm.
So more is better. And so we're trying to push that. And truck drivers, you still need someone to deliver those pellets. And for whatever reason, hiring truck drivers right now is just really hard. So that's kind of where we're feeling the pinch. Of course, we're working on it and we're listing jobs, and I will be fine. But I think that's the biggest impact that we're really seeing at the moment.
Mhm. Mark or John, do you want to comment on this question?
Yeah, from my perspective, the fiber supply is definitely there. In our area, we do also have, an abundance of low-grade fiber that is available in our region. My buying circle, we have 10 suppliers that actually supply the raw material for our dried chips, and there might be somebody outside a circle from here and there, but most of the time we're buying from a 30-mile radius. People just don't really like to travel all that far with a green chip truck. And so we don't really get green chips from far south or far north. And it's wherever the logging operations are going on, those people know to call us and essentially keep us stocked. And so we haven't seen those shortages there, where our pinch points are more on the material supply. And there's a little bit of a labor shortage too, of qualified laborers in terms of service personnel and things like that as well. There was a little bit short. The driving was sort of stabilized, but I have to knock on wood as soon as I get off the phone here, because it all hinges on just a very few drivers. And
Right.
so if one of them gets COVID or is out or has some health issues, then we really get backed up pretty quickly, because we are just a little bit understaffed because of current times.
I'll just add that even in terms of developing more modern R&D, stoves that will burn a lot cleaner and more efficiently, the manufacturers are having a hard time recruiting engineers. So even those that want to really modernize their stove line, that's an issue for them. So if there are any engineers out there, I think you should look to your nearest stove manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A number of these factors, probably not surprisingly, I think are occurring across the entire forest industry. Trucking shortages, the impact of the cost of diesel. I'm sure it's impacting other sectors as well. But something at the Northern Forest Center we hear almost daily in terms of folks working in the wood products industries, that these are constraints across the whole supply chain right now. I want to shift to a different topic. We have a number of questions around the sustainability of the forest resource, used to manufacture wood heating fuels. And I think John, you acknowledged at the top, wood heating, cordwood obviously comes from a tree. Pellets, chips, I think, come from different sources depending on the manufacturer. Some are using residuals, some are using roundwood. But I think this question does come up in consumers' minds. So the question is, how do you speak to consumer? How do you feel good about the sourcing of the material behind your wood fuels? And how do you communicate that to your customers? So Kelli, maybe you can start. I know you already spoke to your certifications, FSC. Anything quickly you want to add from your perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, one thing my father, Pat, has always said is we try to leave the forest better than what it was. And I know that maybe some people don't really understand what that means, but we work with a lot of private landowners in New York State and directly with foresters. And sometimes the forest actually does need to be thinned for it to actually grow and regenerate even better than where it stands there, existed and started with. Sometimes if a forest is too densely populated, that canopy is going to be too difficult for it to continually grow. Trees are going to fall down and rot. So there is a real purpose for some forest thinning sometimes. Sometimes in certain regions of the countries, it's for forest fires. Sometimes it's for insects and infestations. But we do work with like New York State DEC on all of our places that we harvest, and with foresters, directly with landowners, and work with best forest management practices to assure that we are not hurting the natural habitat, the animals that are right there, and sustainably harvesting the wood and bringing that back out. So it's not hurting the land more than in some cases where it's already standing. It's not going to have as much regeneration and regrowth.
Thanks, Kelly. Hannah, how about for Maine Energy Systems? I know you all sourced, I think, pellets from different manufacturers. So how do you all answer that question of understanding your supply chain for consumers interested in the sustainability aspects of heating with wood?
Yep, absolutely. Generally, what our relationship is, we buy the pellets and then pass them along to the consumer. So a lot of the information that we pass along is what we ask of our pellet producers. And as Kelli has kind of indicated, there are standards and there are regulations and there are, sort of metrics that everyone tends to stick to begin with. I think it's funny because with the amount of certifications and the schemes that are out there and the amount of regulation and interest in sustainable forestry, I think it would be very difficult for someone to practice unsustainable forestry and pass that off to a pellet mill. That's just from my experience of the people that I've talked to at the pellet mills and how they view sourcing, much as Kelli just outlined. So we feel great about talking about pellets with our customers, and we don't get a lot of pushback. I mean, people do ask. I think it's really good that people ask. Obviously, we ask the same question of our pellet producers. So, and it's a key part. If we're not managing the forest responsibly, then it defeats the whole purpose of the renewable wood pellet.
Joe, if I can jump in here.
Yeah, please do, John.
I have to admit, this question often really gets me frustrated. Because I often like to tell a lot of my, I come out of the environmental community, but I find a lot of my friends keep questioning this. And I say, well, anyone in the country could take 15 minutes and call 3 or 4 cordwood suppliers in your area. And if you're in an area like Maryland, maybe it's a little bit different far up north, but you'll find that a lot or most of them are tree trimmers. And so these are trees coming down in, around homes, and or if you just walk around the streets and you see a tree come down, you can ask the people, what's happening to the wood? And a lot of times it's chipped up and thrown away. So we have hundreds of tons of wood gets taken to the landfill every year, especially from further down south. Maybe it doesn't happen as up where you are as much, but around here, there simply isn't that much demand for cordwood. Very few people have, in Maryland, you don't have that many people heating with it. So there's a huge surplus of wood that's going to the dump that could be repurposed to displace fossil fuel.
And I like that. Yeah. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Well, I'll speak on that a little bit as well. So, with the wood chips or wood pellets, it's really largely a residual wood from logging operations or from sawmill operations, and it's really the sort of a byproduct. Nobody goes out in the woods and then crushes up a few trees and then puts, and then makes a wood pellet out of it. That's completely unsustainable and not affordable to do that. No self-respecting logger can survive on that financially. And so because you are getting so much more money for a healthy saw log, that you would never destroy a saw log and actually make a low quality chip or a low quality chip for pellet fuel and things like that. So that math just has never really worked out. And some people are sort of misinformed, basically thinking that somebody's going out there and clear cutting forests for pellet fuel or for chip fuel. That's just it doesn't work financially, and it doesn't really exist in practicality. There's always going to be a few bad cowboys out there that do this kind of thing, but they really don't, they're sort of under the radar operators. That's not the majority, and the majority of logging operations are very very large businesses, and they're very much interested in keeping the value in the forest because they're harvesting there. It would be sort of like destroying your own field as a farmer. It makes no sense. And so as far as chips go, our chips, for instance, get about a 25% urban forest. So we have somebody in our yard that is a tree trimmer in our local town, and he trims trees, and then we buy the chipped up material from them. And then we have about 10 or 12 loggers, depending on the time of year. And they have a landing on site, and they are looking for saw logs and veneer logs and pulpwood. And they have their orders to fulfill, and they do that all in a sustainable manner based on foresters that are managing the forest for their landowners. And so that is all done very sustainably. And the forest in New Hampshire is a growing forest. It's not a diminishing forest. And then we're working off the residual, the stuff that does not get taken for the saw logs and the veneer logs and the pulp is left, typically in the past was left in the forest, sometimes ground up, but sometimes it's just wild laying there, and it's just slowly rotting away and creating methane. Now now the energy that is sort of being used as the energy crop now, and that's ground up and then brought to yards like ours or the pellet mills that are all around New England as well.
Yeah, there's a comment from Charlie Levesque in the chat that, yeah, our forests are growing. We're using 25% on average of what is growing each year. But this is a complex story. And I think that's always been a challenge of it, is that there is a lot, as you all have said, behind the whole system that brings wood to market. There are a lot of built-in factors that do point towards and ensure attention to sustainability. But it's hard to crystallize, in a really succinct answer, as our conversation is demonstrating. We have just a couple of minutes left, so I want to pivot a little bit to the policy realm. There are a couple of specific questions, Kelli, about New York and the Climate Act that passed in the past year there, and how that has impacted or not, your business, interest in your product. And for the rest of our panelists, would love any quick comments on how you are seeing public policy, whether that's at the state level or the federal level, support what you're doing or complicate what you're doing. But Kelli, if you don't mind, why don't we, I know it's a fraught topic, but do you have any quick observation on the impact of the climate law in New York?
Well, it's a pretty hefty packet. I've read it briefly a long time ago, but initially, I think there were some consumers that heard that it meant that this could be this big wood ban in New York State. And it's not necessarily that's what's coming. But there's still hope with like the Empire State Forest Products Association in New York State. They're trying to help with suggestions because there was an open comment period. Other groups of loggers, foresters, and manufacturers to try to help shape the language a little bit more to incorporate wood pellet use here in New York State. I think their bigger concern, from what I had read, was something to do with air quality metrics, and so that's something that we're also providing data for the CLPCA, and that I think it's still a work in progress right now. So I do think that there's still going to be an inclusion for biomass and wood pellet heating, but we hope that it can be a bigger part of their focus moving forward. So it's still a working process right now.
Thanks, Kelli. Yeah, go ahead, John.
And John may know more, honestly. He's the policy guy. He takes more time to read up on it than probably I have.
Yeah, policy-wise, I think things may be going sideways. We see some agencies, state and federal, kind of pulling back while others are moving forward. It's really hard to see much cohesion now. And I think some of these questions may be harder in 10, 20 years when there's tons of wind and solar electricity on the grid. And because it's clear to me, if you are displacing fossil fuels, it's a clear win to use biomass. But if you're displacing solar or wind, then it's not nearly as clear cut. So, you know, it will be a different conversation as we move forward.
Yeah, for us, we in New Hampshire, we have I think we have very good support in general as far as states go in New Hampshire. So it's a pretty, you know, we have good rebates and good grants. Perhaps our governor, you know, he did turn down or didn't support necessarily the biomass generators. And I'm not a huge supporter of the biomass generators just because of the low efficiency of these apparatuses there. So, but of course, I'm in support of biomass in general. So I'm a little bit conflicted myself on that. But in general, I think the politics, you know, oftentimes thanks to Charlie Niebling, are really good in this state. And it takes actually a champion like that to help with legislative workings and dealings like that, because a person like me, I don't have the capacity to do it or the know-how to do it. You have to be really familiar with sort of how government works in order to, you know, take advantage of it and communicate with it and then have it be reciprocated back. But we, you know, we have really favorable recs and we have favorable grants in this state, and a lot of the neighboring states, I mean, Vermont and Maine does quite well. Massachusetts has just not done so well. They just can't seem to get out of their own way. It's not because of the state, because clearly they have done really good with solar, and New Hampshire has not done well with solar. So it's just state by state. There's, you know, different champions that are really achieving high success in one part, but not in the neighboring state. It doesn't make sense to me that we don't have good solar workings, you know, 1 mile north of their border. And why does that not work like that? And same for biomass down in Massachusetts. I wish that it worked much better down there from sort of a grant perspective and politics, but it's really frowned upon. And that makes it hard when somebody else frowns upon your technology and it's all of a sudden sort of a lesser technology. It's harder to do business, and people look at you a little bit sideways when you go and propose something, and then they say, well, this person said that you're killing the forest, or it's always a battle. And so it's nice to get government support. I think, you know, there's a few big players in the state here, and oftentimes involved with lignetics, because New England wood pellet was sort of the you know, one of the birthplaces of wood energy in New Hampshire here, you know, the early adopters. And so, and of course, you know, Maine Energy Systems up north, and also Scott Nichols here in northern New Hampshire and Lyme. And so there's a few really key movers that have done just an incredible job, and I wish I could support them more. But from a policy standpoint, I think New Hampshire does okay, but could do much better.
Thanks, Mark. And I want to see if you have a final word, and then we're going to start to wrap this up.
Just on the policy real quick, I think we can all agree that whenever we're faced with a really complicated problem, very rarely is there one single perfect answer. It might happen occasionally, but in my experience, not very often. So I would say keep that in mind when we look at, you know, the question of decarbonization and what good technology is and what that means. It doesn't mean we shouldn't throw out the good for the perfect. And I think what we're seeing in the realm of policy as a whole is we have pretty good education in terms of carbon. People seem to understand that, and our policymakers seem to understand that. And they understand forest sustainability. And then you look at the actual equipment, and that's where there's a little bit of a breakdown. Like if you take an oil boiler and you look at it, you get a test report, it's 79, 85% efficient, whatever it might be. That's what they're judging is efficiency. But when you take an oil boiler next to a wood pellet boiler, sure, we can judge ours on efficiency, and they're really efficient. But if you also look at the particulate matter that's coming out of the chimney, there was a 2019 study done in UMass Amherst, actually. And they looked at this and said, essentially, what's coming out of that chimney was the same amount of particulate matter from the pellet boiler as was from the oil boiler at comparable efficiencies. The only main difference there is that the particulate matter from the oil boiler had toxic particles in it, whereas the wood pellet didn't. So from an overall public health perspective, from a renewable perspective, I really think we have to start looking towards the technology and getting familiar with, okay, how do we test these things? How do we talk about them? How does policy encourage what's smart rather than what we are familiar with, basically? And so I guess that would be my final point, is it's not really in our New England nature waste. So use what's around us, and it might not be perfect, but it is very good.
Awesome, Hannah. Thank you. I'm going to use that. I can't attempt to close any better than that. So there is so much more we could talk about. I want to acknowledge there's a lot of good questions and some lively discussion going on in the chat that we haven't gotten to. We'll try to follow up offline if there are questions we didn't answer to get folks an answer. But I want to give our panelists a virtual round of applause. Thank you all so much for taking your time and sharing your perspectives and ideas today. And I'm going to turn it back to Kelsey to close us out.
Thank you again to our panelists and for all of you for attending. Before you go, I want to direct you again to the feelgoodheat.org resource to educate consumers and also follow along on our channels to be able to share resources as we create them. Also, we invite you to register for the next webinar the center is co-sponsoring with the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center on the timely topic of solving workforce challenges. Kindle is dropping the link in the chat if you're interested. I also encourage you to sign up for the Northern Forest Center's email digest for news and updates about the wood product sector and on the next webinars. You will receive a link tomorrow to the evaluation form about this webinar. It'll also include a recording, and just a quick thank you again to all of you for joining us, to our panelists, and to the Northern Border Regional Commission and the Economic Development Administration and the other funders for supporting this series. I hope you stay warm and have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.